I don't drink, but that might change. In advance of the trial, the evidence will show that Durst created a backstory to make this version of events seem believable. Durst was an avid and experienced shooter. Durst claimed that he and Morris would go target shoot.
The nearest shooting range was halfway to Houston, in something called, I don't know what, Pasadena. The nearest shooting range was in Pasadena, which was on the way to Houston. A good 20-minute drive from Galveston. And I would go there and shoot. And I mentioned that to him, either I was on my way, or we were talking, whatever it was. He said, I like to shoot, but I don't like to go to the shooting range because the shooting range is inconvenient. There are people on both sides shooting. Yes, you are in a little place. I guess in Galveston, everything was a little based. Where you could go and hardly anybody was there until there was a park there, but the park didn't open till like 10 or something like that. You went early in the morning, there'd be nobody there. Perfect place for target shooting. There was a 10-foot high embankment, which is what they all want for target shooting, because the regular targets have bows and arrows. It gets raggedy and bullets will start going through it. So this was a perfect place. We could put the target up on the embankment and shoot at it without worrying about anybody seeing. I mean, this is illegal. You're not allowed to go on public land and just shoot, except during hunting. We did that maybe 10 times.
And again, Mr. Durst's testimony at Galveston was not, there was not a camera in the courtroom. So what will happen is we'll end up reading that testimony in. Somebody will stand up there, a member of the prosecution team, and they'll be reading as Bob Durst. Someone will read as the prosecutor, and someone will read as the defense attorney. It might be a member of the defense, it might not be. And in essence, we'll not really be doing anything new. We'll just be reading and answering the questions as they appear at that time. So Durst testified that the first time, he talked about the first time he and Morris allegedly went shooting. He says that Morris shot rapid fire without aiming between shots. Durst said that he yelled when this happened, "Stop, stop, stop." Durst said the gun jammed at that point. Durst said as he was yelling, Morris turned towards him, pointing the loaded 9mm directly at him. Durst says he yelled, "Point it down, point it." Durst's response, according to him, to what the evidence will show, is extremely dangerous conduct. No one who handles a firearm with any experience, the evidence will show, would ever behave in a manner like that. And the evidence will show that anybody who had firearms experience, who was with somebody who did that, is going to know instantly that's not someone I'm going shooting with. Durst says he said to Morris, "You are not going to shoot the 9mm anymore, but I will buy you a target pistol." Now remember, the evidence is going to show that Mr. Durst has to explain why he's buying the murder weapon less than a month before Morris Black's going to be killed. Now target pistols, you're going to hear evidence. Target pistols by design have very light trigger pulls. So when you have a target pistol, and when hitting a pistol, when you squeeze the trigger, the evidence is going to demonstrate that when you squeeze it, people tend to move the weapon. The stronger the trigger pull, the more the weapon moves and the harder it is to be accurate. When you have experienced expert marksmen, particularly competitive shooters, they will have target pistols designed, and those target pistols have very light triggers. Some people call them hair triggers. And they're very light because when you're coming up and you're setting up your shot, you want to be able to squeeze as little as possible so that you're not having any movement in the firearm. So, according to Mr. Durst, his solution to prevent Morris Black, who's recklessly handled the 9mm with a much heavier trigger pull, is to get him a target pistol that has an incredibly light trigger pull. That's what the evidence is going to be. The evidence is going to be that that wasn't true. Now, 22 pistols, when they are fired, sound more like small pops or firecrackers than gunshots. And the evidence is going to show that, let's assume you wanted to shoot somebody in a house, and you want it to be quiet. 9mm is going to be much louder. 22 can sometimes be mistaken as backfire from a car. Now, Durst also testified about an incident that allegedly happened on September 17, 2001. Now remember, if we're going with the timing, Morris Black's going to be killed on the 28th. So this is 11 days before the killing, and this is what Mr. Durst is going to say happened. Now remember, as you're listening to this, the only evidence that this event happened is Mr. Durst's testimony about it.
We had gone shooting, I had come back, I had gone to the bathroom, he was in the living room, and he shot the pistol in the house. And he shot the pistol at the eviction letter that he had put up on the wall, taped or thumbtacked or whatever up on the wall. And I went out of the bath. First I was sure it was outside, and then I heard he did it again. And then I was sure it was inside, and I went out, he's got the gun in his hand, I said, put the gun down and get out of here.
So Mr. Durst's testimony is that he's using the bathroom, and inside this small apartment, Morris Black puts up the eviction notice and is shooting the firearm in the house, in the apartment, not once, but twice. That's what Mr. Durst said. By the way, it said 2011, again, and this is my fault. The interviews are 2010 and 2012. I do not know why I have that error on the slides. That's my error, I apologize. Now, at his Galveston murder trial, Durst was very clear that he demanded his apartment key back from Morris during this incident on September 17th. Right here. I think I was sort of tongue-tied. It just seemed so obvious to me. You can't shoot a gun in an apartment. He was 20 feet away from where I was. So what did you do? I said, I want you to give me back the key, and I want you to get out of here. So did he give you the key? He took the key off his chain, and he took the eviction notice. He said he would fix whatever the damage was. I walked over to the door, and I had opened the door to show him I wanted him to leave. And he always walked around with bags and a knapsack. So Mr. Durst is very clear. He got the key back from Morris Black on September 17th. Despite claiming that Morris Black shot at the eviction letter was recovered. It was introduced at Galveston, and there are no holes in it. Now, Durst contends that 1 week later, on September 24th, 7 days after the first incident, 4 days before Morris Black is going to be killed, there's a second shooting by Morris in the house of the gun. But this time, there's a key inconsistency that you will see.
A week or whatever it was later, I took the gun and put it someplace where he wouldn't be where we had been keeping it. And he came back in and he shot again, and I took the key away. And the first time he shot, I didn't take the key away from him. Mistake, I didn't take the key. I said, I don't want you here anymore. I didn't go through my mind, and would come in anyway. Second time he shot in the apartment, I took his key away. So he couldn't come in. And that was pretty much getting close to when I was leaving.
Now, the evidence is going to show that Mr. Durst was very clear when he testified that he took the key away from him the first time. And then he's very clear when he's talking later that it wasn't until the second time. The evidence will further show that Mr. Durst, as has been his pattern, cannot remember his lies. Can't get them right. Now, Durst testified that after the second gun incident, Morris was told and agreed that he was not to come back to Durst's apartment again. Durst also testified that after the incident, he removed the magazine from the pistol and hid it in the oven.
At some point, you gave him a key to your apartment?
Yes.
What
It
was
was
that?
before we went shooting, a long time before we went shooting.
Now, one of the things interesting, I got to know you're a very private person. Do you agree?
No, I don't have close friends.
Yeah. And so, I knew the Galveston story wasn't true when, as soon as I heard you say that you gave Morris a key to the place. I knew right there you would never give him a key.
I never give anybody a key
Yeah,
unless
key.
they were, very tight.
So, Mr. Durst conceded when I interviewed him that, you know what, yeah, I don't give anybody a key. Except for he had said that previously he had given Morris a key so that when he was gone, Morris could watch the TV in his house. Now, the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst is not the kind of person who's especially cognizant or considerate of other people. And as he related in that statement you just heard, I don't give a key to anybody. Now, the physical evidence from the crime scene will also impeach Durst's version of the shooting. Investigators removed the kitchen drywall, which preserved the blood spatter on the kitchen wall, where Durst claimed that the gun was fired. Tom Bevel is a board-certified crime scene reconstructionist and a national leader in the field. Bevel reviewed the blood spatter evidence for the prosecution in Galveston, and he testified about it at the Galveston trial. Bevel's opinion was consistent at the time with that of the defense's own crime scene reconstruction expert, Max Courtney. And both sides have stipulated Mr. Courtney is deceased. So both sides have stipulated that Mr. Courtney's testimony from Galveston will be read in as well. Mr. Bevel is going to testify live. However, most importantly, Tom Bevel is going to tell you that he was never given a transcript of Mr. Durst's testimony at trial. So in other words, he was basing his opinion only on what he saw at the scene and not what Mr. Durst said happened. In 2016, we provided Tom Bevel with Durst Galveston trial testimony for the first time. Bevel concluded that Durst's testimony was inconsistent with the blood spatter evidence at the scene. Now, in preparation for trial in Galveston, the defense created a computerized animation of the shooting, which Bob Durst testified was based on his version of events. So this is created by the defense, their expert. Durst testified at the 2003 Galveston trial that the animation, quote, duplicated exactly what happened. This is the animation. That is Mr. Durst coming in, going to the oven. Now in 2016, for the first time, Tom Bevel reviewed the computerized animation of the shooting. He concluded that Durst's testimony was inconsistent with the computerized animation that had been produced by his expert. So in essence, what Mr. Bevel concluded was, when Bob Durst testified, he did not testify consistent with what was in the animation. Now, Durst also testified to his alleged activities immediately after the shooting with Morris. Durst testified that he was unable to use his cell phone to call for help because he had left it in his car, which he had parked about a mile away at the temple. He testified that after the shooting, he ran upstairs to the apartment directly above, and he knocked on the door saying, "I have to call 911 repeatedly," but no one answered. Maria D. Henriquez lived in the upstairs unit with her husband and baby at the time. She's going to testify here at trial. She's going to say she was home that morning. Durst, remember, said that the shooting occurred at 6:15 a.m. She's going to say, "I was home then." She's going to testify that she did not hear anyone knock on her door or yell, "I have to call 911." Now, Durst testified that after banging on the DeEnriquez's door, he then went to the payphone at Charlie's Burgers, which was located a few houses to the west of the apartment. There was a payphone there. He testified that he couldn't use the payphone because, quote, a woman was on it. He told her allegedly, I have to call 911 repeatedly, but she acted like she did not understand. He said it was almost as if she did not understand what 911 is. Durst described the woman as black, African American, I don't know 40, but I could be off by many, many years. Durst's testimony is the only evidence that this woman ever existed. Durst testified that he then saw a man leaning on a parked car. He repeatedly told that man, I have to call 911. But that man did not say anything either. Durst described this man as also black, but more or less the same age. Again, Durst's testimony at trial is the only evidence that this man ever existed. Now, Durst testified that he then went to one of the two houses between Charlie's Burgers and his apartment and knocked on the door, but no one answered. Durst testified he then returned to his apartment where he came to the conclusion that Morris was dead. He testified that he tried to shut the front door to his apartment, but it wouldn't close. Durst testified that he opened and slammed the door closed in response. Durst testified that Maria de Henriquez heard the slamming noise and stepped out of her apartment. He further testified that he waved at her like he was saying hi. Maria de Henriquez will testify that she heard loud noises coming from downstairs. So she exited her apartment. This is her viewpoint looking down. Mr. Durst's apartment would be on the bottom. She looked down the stairs and she saw Bob Durst repeatedly slamming his front door, opening and closing it. The circumstantial evidence will demonstrate that this was Mr. Durst's attempt to make her think that the gunshot, the noise that had been heard, was the door slamming and not a gunshot. Now, Durst testified that he then left his apartment and he went to the seawall. The seawall is kind of an area in Galveston. It's not that far from where Mr. Durst was living. You can walk around, etc. He said at the seawall he saw more people, but did not tell any of them what had happened with Morris. He testified that at the seawall he sat down in the sand and he came to a realization. Because of the mysterious circumstances surrounding his wife's death, as well as the facts that Morris had been shot in the face in his apartment and with his gun, he could not go to the police. They would never believe him. He testified that for these reasons, he decided to make Morris' body disappear and to make it look like Morris had walked away from his life of his own free will. The evidence is going to show that even Durst cannot keep track of the multitude of versions of this story. Durst testified about the clothes he was wearing the morning of the shooting. I went over there in shorts, running shorts, and what I call a workout short, kind of a thick t-shirt, but it's got long sleeves. During his testimony, Durst gave a detailed count of exactly what he did the day of the shooting, both before and after. When asked if he had time to change his clothes, Durst unequivocally responded no. However, the Walmart surveillance video, which is a few hours later, shows Bob Durst not wearing running shorts, but dressed in khakis and a shirt. Mr. Durst was asked on cross-examination by the prosecutor, did you take time to shower in your apartment and change clothes before you walked back to the car? No, sir. So if you went straight from the temple to Walmart, how did you end up in those khaki slacks and the white t-shirt and stuff, the belt and nice shoes? He answers, I don't remember. The prosecutor says, you hadn't thought about that, had you, Mr. Durst? And he responds, not until this instant. As part of his defense, Durst testified that he had psychological analysis and testing which showed Asperger's syndrome, which is now it's on the autism spectrum. However, during the March 15, 2000 interview, I addressed this issue about this alleged autism Asperger's, and this is what Mr. Durst said.
Yeah, another thing that I gotta say, the whole Asperger's thing. I never thought that amounted to anything. That was a psychiatrist coming up with an explanation, and it was never necessary at the trial. We didn't need the psychiatrist.
Right, but Bob, you agree, that was a load of bullshit by the shrink.
Yeah.
Mr. Durst conceded during the interview that the Asperger's thing was bullshit. Now, at the conclusion of his highly publicized trial in Galveston, Mr. Durst was found not guilty. He was acquitted. He was not found innocent. Juries don't find innocence, not criminal juries. The jury found that the prosecution, with the evidence they had presented, had not proven their case of murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Mr. Durst subsequently pled guilty to tampering with evidence. That's kind of a nice way of saying dismembering Morris's body and throwing him in the trash in the ocean. And bond jumping. One moment, Your Honor.
I think that it's a good time for a break, Mr. Elliott. This is running more smoothly than Mr.
Yes, something I want to take care of.
Mr. Lewin, you may continue your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, you guys have probably seen a lot of these. This is the last one, I promise. What if I would have said I'm almost half done? Okay. Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling. That's Mark Smerling on the left, that's Andrew Jarecki on the right. They are filmmakers, and we're partners in a production company called Hit the Ground Running, sometimes abbreviated as HTGR. They're going to testify, you're going to hear from them. And you're going to hear that they both grew up in the Scarsdale, New York area. And that they became friends as young adolescents, 12, 13 years old. And that Mark ended up going to film school. Andrew did not go to film school, but he has a deep interest in film. And they ended up starting this production company. And then originally, they were going to do a they did a documentary called Capturing the Freedmans in 2003. It was nominated for an Academy Award. It didn't win. And their next project, which they'd always been interested in, was Bob Durst. They both grew up, if you remember, the Durst family grew up, had a house in Scarsdale, New York. Now the evidence is going to show that Andrew Jarecki comes from an equally wealthy family. Son of Henry Jarecki, and that Andrew also is independently wealthy himself, and that in essence he had an interest in making films with Mark, and that's what they started doing. So after Capturing the Freedmans, they ended up deciding, you know what, let's do a fictional movie. In that fictional, it's back to the Freedmans, I'm sorry for a moment. The movie Capturing the Freedmans, let me back up, I'm sorry, it was released in 2003. And they originally, what happened was, they were going to do a movie about a famous New York City clown, someone who entertained children. He was kind of a local legend in New York City. And when they started doing research, they found out that the clown's brother, and by clown I mean not like jerk, I mean like a children's clown, his brother and his father had been accused of child molestation in Nassau County. It was a very big case back there, very long-running case. And they decided, you know what, forget the clown thing. We're going to do a documentary about these two individuals. Now, by the time they got on it, the trial had been years earlier. And the father had already died. Jesse Friedman, the son, had already been in prison. I think when they started, he was already out. But they basically go out and they end up investigating this case. Now they're going to tell you that both of them are far from, these are not guys who are watching Fox News Channel and are real aggressive on criminal prosecution, they're going to tell you that they have pretty liberal beliefs and that they believe that Jesse Friedman was wrongly accused, and they made this documentary. Well, after that happened, the documentary, they decided for the next project, let's do a fictionalized version of Bob Durst's life. And that was All Good Things. Now, All Good Things was marketed, produced, etc., as Bob Durst's life story dramatized. So they changed the names, and they changed some of the actual information that you know. So as an example, in the movie, which you're going to see that movie. In that movie, the Morris Black character ends up killing the Susan Berman character as like a hitman for Bob Durst. There's no evidence whatsoever that that occurred, that was created. And they did not use the actual names. Ryan Gosling played Bob Durst. If somebody's going to play you, that's pretty good. And Kirsten Dunst, played Kathie. The movie came out in 2010, but they started doing the research in 2005. And what they basically went around and did is, they basically, they're investigative documentarians. That's what they do. So they basically went around and they talked to as many people as they could find in Bob Durst's life who would speak to them. And that meant people in Bob Durst's life, in Kathie Durst's life, in Susan Berman's life. They didn't get much for Morris Black, but they talked to everyone they could. And that research started back in 2005. Now, All Good Things was released in 2010. It was the culmination of those efforts. This is the introduction to the movie. It just says, this story was inspired by events that took place between January 1971 and November 2003 in Texas, Los Angeles, and New York. The Durst character in the movie is the scion of a wealthy Manhattan real estate dynasty. And I want to make sure it's clear. The movie itself was marketed as the based on a true story, somewhat fictionalized version of Bob Durst. So the character's wife, like Kathie Durst, is a pretty blonde woman who is from a working class family in Long Island, going to medical school. The Durst character in the movie is emotionally and physically abusive to his wife. He controls the relationship. He refuses to have children. When the wife eventually gets pregnant, he forces her to have an abortion. Abandoning her dreams of a family, the wife returns to school and eventually becomes a nurse. After graduation, she decides to attend medical school, and she enrolls at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York City. This is the character in the movie. As you know from what we've been discussing, the parallel, it's Kathie Durst. Now, the marriage continues on a downward spiral. The wife retains a divorce attorney, and in response, the Durst character cuts off funds which she needs to pay for medical school. In the midst of a nasty divorce, the Durst character ultimately kills the wife. The wife's body is never recovered. After the disappearance of his wife, the Durst character's best friend acts as his spokesperson. And she was, again, modeled after Susan Berman, even down to the hair, etc. Years later, law enforcement begins to reinvestigate the wife's mysterious disappearance. This was the character modeled on Westchester County, at the time, District Attorney Janine Pirro, who was the district attorney who was responsible for South Salem, New York, when the case was originally reinvestigated in 1999 and 2000. Now, in response to the reinvestigation, the Durst character moves to Galveston, Texas, where he disguised himself as a deaf-mute woman in order to hide from the news authorities. Fearful that she will reveal what she knows, the Durst character has his best friend murdered. And again, in the movie, the Morris Black character is the person who pulls the trigger. I want to emphasize again, there is no evidence of that. You will not be hearing any evidence of that. And that's what you can do when you are representing, making a movie that you're not saying is completely factually accurate. Now, the Durst character subsequently kills his old and cantankerous neighbor in Galveston. He then dismembers the neighbor's body and disposes of the body parts in Galveston Bay. Now, in addition, in the movie, to being responsible for the death of 3 people, in the movie, the Durst character also kills his dog, Igor. Now, in advance of the movie's release, Bob Durst obtained a screenplay, a copy of the movie. And after reading the script, Durst attempted to contact Andrew Jarecki by phone. Andrew Jarecki's going to testify. He's going to tell you that he was told that Bob Durst had reached out to the head of Magnolia Pictures, who was making the movie with Andrew Jarecki, saying, this is Bob Durst, and I need to talk to Andrew Jarecki. The head of Magnolia Pictures did not believe it was Bob Durst. He thought it was a prank. He thought it was Andrew Jarecki imitating Bob Durst. But it turns out it was. It absolutely was Bob Durst reaching out. He had gotten a hold of the script, he had read it, and he liked it. So Durst and Jarecki eventually spoke on October 28, 2010. Andrew Jarecki has a habit of recording his phone calls. And in New York, it's what's called a one-party state. You're allowed to do that. So the first time that he and Bob Durst spoke, it's recorded. As you will hear, the idea to do the interviews that would end up forming the basis of the Jinx did not come from Andrew Jarecki. It came from Bob Durst.
Anyway, so I have an idea. I have no idea if it makes any sense, but you're the one to talk to about it. Sure. Now, the background is that I have over the years been approached by all the various interview shows. And I almost went on one of them first in the early 80s when this all first started to happen with Connie Chung on ABC. And then right after I was acquitted, on CBS, with whatever the name of the show is that they were doing back in 2004. Right. The true crime kind of stuff. Right. But more recently, I've been approached, partly before, or I don't know if partly or primarily or whatever, more aggressive by those Friday evening interview shows, 2020 and Dateline, and a whole bunch of the lesser stars. And I am thinking about doing one of those, and while I was thinking about it, I remembered that the show you did, the movie you did on the Friedmans, you had both the movie and you had stuff, I think it was in court, and I think there was some discussions or something like that, which were really not part of the movie, but were a separate something or other. And that is my thought. That would it make sense for, as in some capacity, there to be an interview with me related to what's in the movie?
So these interviews actually happened. They would later become the basis for the HBO miniseries, The Jinx. Now remember, the interviews in The Jinx were edited. You will not be hearing in this trial any of the interviews from The Jinx. You will hear, and you have already heard, some interviews that have been in The Jinx, but you've heard the unedited versions. By unedited versions, meaning the only edits were done at the instruction of the judge or pursuant to court rulings. The material that was given to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, Los Angeles Police Department, by Jarecki and Smerling and their employees was the unedited footage. So on November 6, 2010, Jarecki provided Durst with a private screening of All Good Things. This is only about a week after they first talked. And this occurred at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills. Remember, Bob Durst has already seen the screenplay, but now he sees the movie. Now remember, the movie itself is going to make very clear that Bob Durst, either himself personally or at his direction, murdered 3 people as well as at least 1 dog. Now, on November 27, 2010, Jarecki sent Durst's attorney, Steve Rabinowitz, a draft agreement for the planned interview. Mr. Durst, the evidence is going to show, consulted a bunch of lawyers about doing these interviews. The information that you're going to hear from Mr. Durst is that those lawyers told him, do not do the interviews. Don't do it. Only bad can happen. But the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst loves media attention. When he's in jail and he's talking to his friends, he's asking, what are they saying about me? Send me the news articles. What reporters are covering it? And so, the evidence is going to show that kind of like a moth to light, Bob Durst ends up being attracted to this idea, no matter what his lawyers are saying. So, there's extensive communication between Durst's lawyers and Jarecki regarding the parameters of the interviews. This is from Durst's lawyer, Andrew Jarecki. By the way, how do we have this information? We have this information because Mr. Durst is going to end up allowing Jarecki and Smerling to go through all of his boxes, all of his legal documents, all of his privileged materials that he owns. Go ahead, go through everything. And when he did that, he waived a privilege. So that stuff, normally you don't get to talk about what you said to your lawyers. It's protected by confidentiality, but not when you've given it out to non-lawyers. So anyway, thanks for your prompt response to my email Wednesday. It's good to know that you took our concerns seriously. With the air now cleared, Bob and I are hopeful that we can move forward productively. I'm not going to read the rest, but they talk about the dates of December 11th to the 14th. And that is when the interviews are going to happen. On December 1st, 2010, the movie All Good Things premiered. That's Kirsten Dunst. On December 11th, Durst and his attorney, Steve Rabinowitz, met with Jarecki and Smerling to iron out the last-minute details for the interviews. Now, after the meeting, Durst and Jarecki recorded the DVD commentary that you've been seeing at a recording studio in Culver City. This was done with full knowledge of Mr. Durst's lawyer. In fact, that lawyer accompanied him. He was there while the interview was going on. Now, the evidence is going to show that in the end, Bob Durst does exactly what Bob Durst wants to do. No matter what the advice he's going to do, he's going to say what he wants to do and say. Oops. I think I just skipped a slide.
So my name is Andrew Jarecki, and I'm the director of All Good Things.
DVD commentary. So the movie is on one part of the DVD, and the commentary is on the other. And you can actually, depending on which audio you listen to, you can listen to the DVD commentary. Now that DVD commentary, though, was actually slightly edited. So we have the unedited version. So they go to the Lowe's Hotel in Santa Monica after the recording of that DVD interview, the same day. And that's when Mr. Durst sat for the first 3 days of those interviews with Jarecki and Smerling at the Lowe's Hotel in Santa Monica. He was dressed in that same gray and khaki outfit for all 3 days.
But, that day we talked a bunch and then arranged for you to see the movie for the first time.
That was the clincher, and I knew I wanted to do this with you.
And how did you feel when you sat down to see the movie? Did you have trepidation about it? And how did you feel when you were watching it?
Enormous trepidation, but I felt the movie was very, very, very close in much of the ways about what pretty much happened.
Now remember, that movie that Mr. Durst has watched depicted him as a triple murderer. And Mr. Durst's response to seeing that movie is going to be, the movie was very, very close in much of the ways about what pretty much happened. Now, Mr. Durst expanded upon that and explained why he had agreed to do the interviews with Durecki.
When we talked, you know, you and I spoke a little bit about the DVD for the film, the fact that that created more of an opportunity to talk about the subject matter, talk about your life, and then at one point I suggested to you that rather than, you know, just doing something on the DVD, we actually sit down and do this interview and really talk through your life and your history in a more elaborate way. What appealed to you about that, and why did you decide to do that?
Because you had really done the research on me. The screenplay was not a hatchet job, and I had always planned on someday, the someday was always way out there, but someday giving interviews about what happened as opposed to what people think or believe or something like that happened. I was immediately attracted to the idea of having you do the interview. I felt strongly that the interview would not be a hatchet job, because you didn't do a hatchet job in the movie.
Now, the movie is going to be shown to you, not because the movie itself is evidence, but because when Mr. Durst sees this movie, which depicts him as a triple murderer, he's going to adopt it. He's going to say, yeah, that's accurate. He's going to say, I didn't think you did a hatchet job. And that's why it's going to be shown. Now, the evidence is going to show that when Mr. Durst has a problem with something, he has no problem vocalizing it. In the next clip, Mr. Durst, during the DVD commentary, he's not going to be asked if there's anything he doesn't like about the movie. He is watching a scene from the movie. And this is the scene from the movie that disturbed him. The evidence is going to show it's not going to be the murder of his wife, Kathie. It's not going to be the murder of Susan Berman. It's not going to be the killing of Morris Black. This is what Mr. Durst had a problem with in the movie.
And this made me feel bad about the movie, Andrew. I mean, the idea that I could kill Igor, I don't like.
What Mr. Durst was upset about was that the movie, and it was stronger than inference, the movie basically strongly implied that Bob Durst had murdered his dogs. The evidence is going to show that Bob Durst was very upset about it. The evidence is going to further show that Bob Durst had every right to be upset about it because, unlike the other killings, it wasn't true. Now, during the interview, Durst frequently admitted that he has a tendency to talk to himself.
Anyways, so in the morning when I'm in the shower, I'll frequently find myself talking to myself about somebody or other, or some experience I just had, or something I was planning on doing that evening. And I said, I just keep going back to the same stuff again and again.
You've talked about the talking to yourself. Was that something that you were aware of that
From the
happened?
time I was a little boy, I always been talking to myself, and I would frequently get I almost got in fights a couple of times. I would get very animated with my hands, and I'd be talking to myself a whole bunch of times, because I'd be staring wherever I was staring and talking to myself and waving my hand. I had guys come over and say, hey, you got something to say to me, buddy? Particularly in Texas. If you want to say something, say it. And I would always find, sorry, man, I'm just talking to myself. Well, you're looking right at me. Strictly a coincidence, I'm sorry.
And when you start talking to yourself,
A lot of times I wouldn't even know it. Wouldn't be aware of it. Or I'd be... Sorry. I would be aware that I was talking to myself, but not aware that I was affecting anybody.
And nowadays, do you still do that?
I talk to myself, but not in public and with lots of hand movements and loudly. Or maybe I talk to myself loudly, but not with lots of people around.
Now, the evidence in this case is going to demonstrate that, as Mr. Durst said, often when he is talking to himself, sometimes he is not even aware that he is doing so. On multiple occasions during the filming of the interviews, he was caught on film talking to himself, to the point that he was reminded by his attorney, who was present, "Bob, you're mic'd. They're recording this. They can hear you." Mr. Durst was well aware that if he had a microphone on, that what he was saying was being recorded. Durst would even talk to himself between takes. Here you can hear him literally practicing his answers to a question. I'm going to just read it. It's hard for you guys to hear. We'll have it up when you can hear it better. What Mr. Durst said is, "I did not knowingly, purposely lie. Not knowingly, purposely lie. I did not knowingly, purposely, intentionally lie at all. I did make mistakes. My lawyers told me, you go in there and the jury catches you lying in front, like if what the DA says about the past, you're lying, and rot for the rest of your life in prison. You can't go in there and lie like that. I did not. Well, I made mistakes." On December 15, 2010, a couple of days after interviews were completed, Durst's attorney sent Jarecki an email saying, "Thanks for giving Bob a fair shake." After the December 2010 interviews with Durst, Jarecki and Smerling continued to research the project and to conduct additional interviews. In August of 2011, the filmmakers interviewed Susan's son, Sarah, and encouraged him to look through old files and personal effects. That's Sarah on the right. The last time you saw Sarah, he had this long, flowing hair. And in that time frame, he lost it. But Sarah had a lot of loyalty to Susan. After Susan had been murdered, Sarah was the one that got all of her personal effects. Now, Sarah was in a difficult position. He's going to testify in this case. He did not know Bob Durst prior to Susan's murder, but Bob befriended him. And Sarah was somebody who, when the discussions about Bob Durst potentially killing his mother came up, Sarah was a strong defender of Bob. And in fact, Bob Durst gave him close to $200,000 to go to college. Now, the evidence is going to show that Sarah used a little bit of that money to go to college, but not most of it. They also went into business together. And Sarah was making money off of Bob. And the evidence is going to show that Sarah Kaufman understood that Bob Durst was a cash cow for him. And that turning over information that would be incriminating for Bob Durst was going to cut the money off. Now, Sarah also, and you'll have to decide for yourself whether he fully believed it, wanted to believe it was a combination. Sarah did not want to believe that Bob Durst had killed his mother. Because basically, Sarah is now in the years taking money from this man, so he has a vested interest in believing, no, Bob Durst didn't commit this murder. In August 2011, the filmmakers interviewed him, and they encouraged him to look through Susan's old files and personal effects. And he had remembered that there was a letter. He hadn't looked at it. He called it, he kind of had a box of pain. And this is kind of in the box of pain. But he remembered it was there. And when he was interviewed by Jarecki and Smerling, the inference, even more than that they were presenting to him was that in essence, his mom, Susan Berman, was subtly, if you want to call it blackmail or manipulation, that in essence, she was squeezing Bob for money and that that's why he killed her. Sarah didn't want to believe this. And he remembered that he believed that he had seen evidence that Bob Durst had sent Susan money before the reinvestigation occurred. Now, the evidence is going to show that Bob Durst's motivation to be nice to Susan and give her money started on February 1st, 1982, when she called the dean for him. But in Sarah's mind at that point in time, you know, I've got a piece of evidence that shows that, you know what, Bob Durst was sending her money before the investigation became public, before Bob learned of it in October of 2000, and that therefore that's going to show that no, he's not sending her money to keep her quiet, he just sends her money. So he goes back through and he finds the letter. Now upon doing so, he makes a startling discovery. A year and a half before the murders, Durst sent Susan a letter. This is the letter that is referred to as the Sarah letter and the Sarah envelope. At the top is what is basically embossed stationery with Bob Durst's New York address at the time. It's dated, there's a postmark on the envelope we'll get to in a second, March 3rd, 1999, but it says Susie. Now and again, I think about old times. Good luck, Bobby. However, far more interesting than the letter was the envelope that it arrived in. Susan Berman, 1527 Benedict Canyon, Beverly Hills. Beverly is spelled wrong. Sarah gave Mark Smerling the letter in the envelope. Now, from that time in 2011, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling are going to tell you that they had already seen the Cadaver envelope. They had been provided that information by detectives in the case. They had contacted their very, very capable and skilled investigators and reporters. And what they did was they went out and they talked to everybody they could. And they got law enforcement to give them copies of the original Cadaver note. Paul Coulter's going to testify at trial. He's going to say, you know what? This case was dead. I'm a homicide detective, and I want to see justice done. If they're going to be able to somehow help solve this case, yeah. I'll give them the envelope. I'll give them a copy of it. So they had a copy of the envelope. So obviously, when they look at the envelope, you're going to see the writing in a minute. They're going to tell you that moment they knew Bob Durst murdered Susan Berman. Bob Durst likely murdered Kathie Durst. And now the stories about Galveston didn't really add up. Now, they did not immediately go to the police. They're under no legal duty to do so. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that first and foremost in Jarecki and Smerling's mind was, okay, how can we get this crime solved? It wasn't. They wanted to finish their project. And they wanted to confront Bob Durst. They knew what they had. And now started a series of attempts to get Bob Durst to sit down for an interview. Now, the evidence is going to show that when Bob Durst wants to be cooperative or wants to do something, he's very accessible. But also, when he doesn't, he can be very difficult to reach. So they tried for months to get Bob Durst to sit down for an interview. Andrew is going to take the stand. He's going to tell you there was a time where Bob Durst called him from a restaurant that was playing, I think it was like Spanish music, and he told him that he was in Mexico or Italy, etc. He was just in a restaurant where they were playing the music. Bob Durst kept delaying this last interview. And then Andrew Jarecki is going to tell you about a situation that's just, you can't make this up. One day, Andrew Jarecki receives a call. And the person says who they are, and he says, hey, listen, I was at the gym, and I ended up finding this backpack. And I can't remember if it was at the restaurant at the gym or a restaurant across the street from the gym, but you're going to hear the story from Andrew Jarecki. And the guy says, I found this, and inside this backpack, first of all, there was a lot of marijuana. And number two, there was an address book. And I opened it up, and there wasn't a lot in it, but the first name was Andrew Jarecki. And I used to be in a band with a guy named Jarecki. I think that's your brother. So Andrew's going to say, he gets this call, and he's thinking, that's really kind of bizarre. And so Andrew's trying to set up, he would like to get the backpack back, but also thinking, you know, is this for real? You know, am I going to get shot in an alley? What's going on here? Well, he ends up getting the backpack back from the guy, and it's legitimate. Andrew is able to contact Bob Durst and say, Bob, I got your backpack back. Andrew's going to tell you that was one of the key things that got the interview process back going on, and that led to the final interview on April 18, 2012, where Bob Durst sat down for an interview. His first with Jarecki in nearly a year and a half. Now, let's be clear what the evidence is going to demonstrate. By the time this interview took place, Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling, Zach Stewart-Pontier, who was doing the sound, and their crew, they knew what they had. And their goal was to confront Bob with the Cadaver letter and the Cadaver note and see what they could get. They had started off, Andrew's going to tell you, he started off this movie, this project, like he started off Capturing the Freedmans, with no preconceived notions. In Capturing the Freedmans, he decided this man was wrongly accused. Whether he was or not, that was Mr. Jarecki's position. In this, he started off, and Andrew Jarecki is going to tell you, in some ways, he and Bob Durst have some things in common in terms of where they're from, who their fathers are, etc. And Andrew felt a connection to Bob Durst that made it hard. But he also is going to tell you that once he got the Cadaver envelope and he looked at it and he compared it, that was it. And he wanted to get the confession, and that his plans were that after that was done, that at some point he would take that information to the authorities. I want to be clear. Obviously, that was not his first priority. And believe it or not, no citizen has the legal responsibility to report anything unless there's some pre-existing relationship, you know, you're a parent for a child, etc. But that's what happened. So they sat down for this interview. During the interview, Jarecki asked Durst about the Cadaver letter in the envelope. Now, what was aired in the Jinx, even this last conversation, it was edited. Absolutely. And Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling have never, ever argued or denied that it was edited. What you're going to see is the raw footage. And that's what they provided to us. So during the interview, prior to being shown the letter and envelope, Durst had no idea that Jarecki had them in his possession. So this is an ambush. There's no question about it. Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling are going to hit Bob Durst with this incriminating evidence, and they're going to see what they get. There were multiple cameras that were running. So you're seeing different camera angles that have been put together showing the same effect. That's why it's split screen.
So I want to show you the envelope that that letter came in. Could you read me the...
Sorry. As you're listening, the evidence is going to demonstrate that when Bob Durst is hit with this envelope, that he almost goes on autopilot. And you're going to hear him as he starts talking almost nonsensibly, as the evidence is going to show he's trying to absorb what's going on. But his mouth is still moving. He's still talking. But as you're listening, you're going to, what does that mean? Watch.
So I want to show you the envelope that letter came in. Would you read me the address on this envelope?
Robert Durst, 424, 67 Wall Street, New York, New York, 13005.
And who you sent it to?
Susan Berman, 1527 Benedict Canyon, Beverly Hills, California. Beverly spelled wrong, California, 90210.
So,
Which is, you know, the zip code that you want in Beverly Hills, but you just didn't want Susan's neighborhood.
So obviously I want to ask you about the Cadaver note, the famous Cadaver note. Can you read me the spelling of Beverly Hills?
1527 Benedict Canyon, Cadaver. The same misspelling.
So Beverly is spelled the same way on this and the same way on this.
Same misspelling.
And what does that say to you?
Well, I mean, the writing looks similar and the spelling is the same, so I can see the conclusion the cops would draw.
And I think this, I mean, this is a comparison of the two, right? Which is,
Very similar.
so I guess the question is, did you write the Cadaver note?
No, I didn't write the Cadaver note.
So you wrote this, but you didn't write this.
Definitely wrote this, but I definitely did not write that.
Even though the Beverly is spelled and spelled the same way.
Very similar.
And if, I mean, this, it's similar.
I was about to say, well, these are block letters, and how are you going to write that other than that? I mean, it's almost like a typed thing. It's going to look, the two typewriters, it's going to look the same.
So you wrote one of these, but you didn't write the other one.
I wrote this one, I did not write the Cadaver one.
And can you tell me which one of these you wrote, or which one you didn't write?
No.
Those are the, one's the Cadaver note, one is the Serif note, the envelopes. Bob Durst could not tell which one was which. He said he wrote the Serif note, he said he did not write the Cadaver note. Now, it's indicated when Durst is confronted with incriminating evidence, he often responds with kind of nonsensical rambling. This is a compilation of an example of how that worked during these interviews.
We had a flocati rug, that's a Greek thing.
Or the taxi, there's only one Toby's taxi.
In the bedroom and locking the door and taking they collected garbage. We never took anything. The zip code that you want in Beverly Hills, which you just didn't want. From Trinidad, you fly to San Francisco, from New York, from anywhere.
Now, toward the conclusion of the interview, while Durst was still wearing his microphone, he went to use the bathroom.
Some places are bad. I am going to go use the restroom, which is right here. Except that it's locked. You listening? Oh, someone's in the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
Well, maybe this is the bathroom.
Yeah, that's.
You're all right. This is the bathroom. There it is. Record. Can't imagine.
I'm briefing Zach on this idea for Monday. Could Zach maybe be a part of it? On the Nick Chabon?
Yes, that's just what was on my mind, was Nick Chabon. Now, I'm happy that you record everything that's said, and that you use whatever you want with one. Is that my dinner?
This is your dinner.
Now, when you listen to what's been called the bathroom audio, before the door can even close, the first thing Bob Durst says is, "There it is, you're caught." Then the door closes. Then you hear all the other things, and then you hear very clearly, "Killed them all, of course." It's people's position that this will be the third confession in this case. The one to Nick Chabon, which we haven't gotten to yet. The one to me, when I was interviewing him. And this one. Now, at this time, Bob Durst was very interested in having Nick Chabon interviewed by the movie producers. I'm going to talk about Nick Chabon in a moment, but it's very important that you keep something in mind. This is back in 2012. Nick Chabon is not going to have the dinner that he will have with Bob Durst, where Bob Durst confesses to him about Susan until more than 2 years later. Now, after the April 18, 2012 conversation, they continued to do research for the project and conduct additional interviews. On July 13, 2012, Jarecki emailed Durst asking if it was okay if he interviewed a number of Durst's former lawyers, as well as Ed Wright, who was a private investigator who was hired by Durst's original criminal defense attorney in 1982. Durst responded, "I've always said you can talk to anyone you want." Now, on November 16, 2012, LAPD RET detective Paul Coulter retired. That is not Paul Coulter. That is George Shanley, who's seated right here.
Who wishes he was retired?
He should have, that first clip should have come up, the writing before the picture. So, Detective Shamlian was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. Now, at this point in time, every homicide in Los Angeles is active until it is cleared. However, detectives are not working on every homicide that's happened because in many cases, there isn't anything for them to do. As an example, the Black Dahlia case. That's still an active case, if anyone's ever heard of that. There's a keeper of the Dahlia at LAPD. Whenever someone retires who's the keeper of the Dahlia, it's handed down to the next guy. Now, we're to the point where anyone who could have committed that crime would almost certainly be dead. But that's how it works at LAPD. So, George Shamlian was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. Now, in January 2013, my office began assisting Detective Shamlian on the case. I have a specialty in these areas. This is what I do. Detective Shamlian calls me, and he's going to tell you that he originally contacted me because he had gotten a request from the FBI to exhume Susan's body. So I was brought in, I was asked about it. Detective Shamlian's going to tell you that I advised that given she was shot from behind execution style, that it's no struggle, you're not going to get any DNA. It's not a route you should pursue, because if you get anything, it's likely going to be contamination from over the years and not something from the crime. Now, during this time, investigators and prosecutors viewed the unedited Jarecki and Smerling interviews with Durst. So what happened is that independently, the FBI had become involved in looking at Bob Durst with respect to an unrelated incident in New York. And as a part of that, that detective, that special agent, ended up reaching out to Detective Shamlian. That is what prompted the call over to my office. But meantime, Jarecki and Smerling now wanted to figure out what they could do with the evidence that they had. And what they ended up doing was, they ended up reaching out as well, and ended up making contact with the special agent from the FBI, and then Detective Shamlian as well, and myself. Now, investigators were eventually given possession of the Sarah letter, as well as the unedited footage. On October 29, 2013, Detective Shamlian and I decided, Detective Shamlian's going to tell you that, you know, we wanted to figure out where exactly is the letter. If Susan was sent a check by Bob Durst in the middle of November, we have the check, maybe there's an envelope. Sarah had the envelope from March 3rd, 1999, a year and a half before. Maybe there's an envelope. So we decided that we wanted to go through ourselves the evidence that had been collected. So what happened is, Detective Coulter's going to tell you that they collected a bunch of papers from Susan Berman. At the time they collected those papers, they did not realize the significance of the cadaver note necessarily in terms of matching it up, and they did not carefully go through the evidence. It just sat there.
So, Mr. Lewin, we're going to need to wrap up, so I'm going to give you a couple minutes to transition into an appropriate point.
Thank you, Ron. So, what happened is that we went through those documents. When we went through, we found an October 29, 2013 letter in Susan's property that had been collected, that had been sent from Bob Durst. Although it was handwriting at the top, the 1527 Benedict, that's the cadaver note on top. That's the October letter, the letter that we recovered from November of 2000. Look at right here, Your Honor.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going